The twisted mysteries behind Fran's doomed fate raises the question to what actually happened at the end. If everything happened in Fran's mind, or if they actually happened in real time. Hi folks, I'm R, your narrator. This video will contain spoilers about Fran Bow. With that said, let's begin. Let's quickly go over Fran's story, touching on critical points which will play an important role in theorizing on what actually happened at the end. I've already made a video going over Fran Bow's story, which you can watch by hitting the card above. If you've already done so, you can skip ahead to the time indicated straight to the endings. However, I will analyze this story much more and pass on some theories which I didn't in the previous video, so maybe you can still stick around for the recap. Fran is an unfortunate 10-year-old girl who starts off having a good life with her parents, who happen to gift her a cat Fran will call Mr. Midnight, a few days before they die. The cat will play an important role in the ending, so keep this piece of information in mind. The parents leave on unexplained trips, leaving Fran with her Aunt Grace, a two-faced character whom Fran expresses to how much she loves until she realizes that she's evil. Fran sees a demon called Remar one day, who turns out to be manifested from fear, guilt, and weakness, also known as the Prince of Darkness. Fran, shortly after, feels something isn't right. After hearing her mother's screams, she goes to her parents' room, where she finds them brutally murdered. Fran runs out of the house into the forest and faints due to physical and mental exhaustion, with Mr. Midnight lying on top of her. Things start to take a more fantasy and twisted turn here, as a theory suggests that Fran freezes here to death. Fran's body is then taken to Oswald's asylum, a horrible place with twisted and sadistic staff members who experiment on children and badly abuse them. In there, Fran meets Dr. Dearn, a character who at first seems to be evil, but later proves to be otherwise. It's not clear why Fran is taken to the asylum in the beginning, but later we learn that she had been selected to have her brain tested on, leading to her death. Eavesdropping a conversation between Dr. Dearn and Aunt Grace, Fran hears that Grace wants to tell her something and that she needs to go home, while Dearn refuses. This might suggest how Grace wants to take Fran away from Dr. Dearn's observation so she and Dr. Oswald can perform their experiments on her, while Dr. Dearn actually cares about the mental well-being of Fran and wants to still treat her. Fran discovers in a box that she has been given pills called duotine with high levels of ectoplometine, an ingredient which opens the gate between subconscious and conscious. In other words, causing severe visual and audible hallucinations. These pills are possibly prescribed and overseen by Oswald, the head of Oswald Asylum, to experiment on Fran and use her brain to study the effects. The exact intentions of Oswald are not clear, but it seems that he's been carrying out several radical, unethical, and inhumane experiments throughout his life to understand humans' physical and mental state better. We learn at the end that Oswald was the culprit behind manipulating Fran to kill her parents. Therefore, he possibly synthesized duotine and experimented on Fran to realize the potential of mind control practices. Throughout Fran's journey, she is hunted by a demon called Remor, which Oswald mentions to be the manifestation of guilt, fear, and mental illness. Therefore, the duotine pills might be the culprit behind Remor's existence and human experimentation, as other victims subjected to Oswald experiments also experienced seeing shadowy monsters called Kamalas, a peaceful entity called Edward, Remor, and Mabuka. Therefore, it's a possibility that these pills specifically cause these hallucinations, And Remor can manipulate and possess people, with bleeding eyes being a sign that people are under his possession, something that happened to Fran on the night her parents were murdered. Also, this is something that will happen to Dr. Deern at the end, a firm skeptic, which we will talk about later in the game. Just as Fran is about to escape the asylum, she gets attacked by Remor and subsequently possessed. Correspondingly, Fran's eyes start to bleed. As Remor is about to pull Fran into the fifth reality, the domain of evil and corruption, which seems to be located in the asylum, Remor gets stopped, presumably by the peaceful entity, Edward. The guard chasing after Fran gets his head removed and dies, but as soon as Remor is gone, we see him well and alive, as if nothing happened, a sign that it's all happening inside Fran's head. Things become even more fantasized as Fran believes she goes into a hedge maze following a mechanical cat while being chased by Kamalas, or evil entities feeding on people's sorrow and mental illness. Fran has some extreme experiences in a surreal world when she crafts a door, which she attaches to a well and goes into a colorful house belonging to a tormented twin sister called Clara and Mia. Searching for Mr. Midnight, Fran finds them locked in a cage by the twin sisters. They inform Fran to perform a ritual for them, which presumably separates their bodies and allows them to kill the man responsible for this. The sisters were in fact subjected to a cruel experiment by Dr. Oswald in the Oswald asylum some years ago. They were given duotine pills, which made them hallucinate and see Edward and other surreal creatures. Then he lobotomized them and surgically attached them to each other to see how their DNA reacts. After a few months, they die and Oswald throws their corpses into the well. Fran possibly imagines them due to taking duotine and seeing experiments were done to the twins. She also finds actual children remains who had been shot at the bottom of the well. Fran, with the help of Edward, frees the trapped souls of the twins from their atrocious bodies and finally reunites with her cat, who's capable of speaking now. Then again, this is an unlikely place to meet Mr. Midnight, at the bottom of the well. As Fran leaves the twins' house, which is located on an isolated island, she gets across the water to the mainland, where she encounters a narrow bridge atop a hill. Before she reaches the other side, Remor breaks the bridge, causing Fran to fall. In a dream, Fran sees her aunt comforting her. The aunt soon leaves, with Mr. Deern giving her another pill, when Fran starts crying blood, a sign of possession or mind control. Keep this in mind as I will break it down in the endings. When Fran wakes up, she finds herself as a log without arms or legs. This chapter is called Vegetative State, which might suggest Fran loses her mobility after some further experimentation on her in the real world. Fran gets haunted by visions of her deep dark negative thoughts, that her parents left her and didn't care, that she's unstable mentally and could at any minute kill her own cat, that she would end her own life, that she is the culprit of killing the twin sisters and her parents, and many more visualized negative thoughts. But when she's in Ethersta, a magical place that gives her arms and legs and treats her with respect and positivity, she becomes reassured not to worry, and as long as she has love, she's alive, and that death is just a mental state. Again, clues that Fran is hallucinating and that she's probably just in coma. Fran leaves Ethersta alongside her cat as the king of Ethersta realizes that Fran isn't ready yet and needs to find her truth, which might indicate that Fran is in a vegetative state now, but her soul isn't ready to settle in heaven yet, so she needs to stay on Earth a little more to find answers before settling in heaven. When she leaves Ethersta, she encounters Edward, an entity between darkness and light, who has good intentions in heart, a guide in limbo. Fran rides Edward's flying machine to go back to her house and see her aunt, which crashes after being attacked by Kamalas. Presumably a metaphor for how souls can go to different places with help of Edward. In a dream, Edward tells Fran that this is the end of the story, but Fran persists to have a happier ending. Therefore, Edward continues. Fran then finds herself alone in the forest with Mr. Midnight and a broken bicycle. She goes to her house on foot, which is engulfed in fog and locked. Doesn't matter what Fran does, she can't enter, a sign that she's dead and can't go inside. She instructs Mr. Midnight to go in and open the door from inside, but time passes on and he doesn't open. Shortly after, Dr. Deern appears and takes Fran to his car, who informs Fran that Mr. Midnight is dead. He probably died in the forest due to cold and not finding food. Dr. Deern informs Fran that the asylum fabricated her death and gave falsified information to newspapers. He further mentions that he was fired from the asylum as he learned too much. Confused to whether Fran is dead or not, he goes to her burial site. In there, they find the corpse of a cat in her coffin. Fran being adamant that Mr. Midnight is alive and this corpse is of another cat, they leave the cemetery to go back to her house and check if Mr. Midnight is in the house. Just as they exit, they both get possessed by Remor and gets taken to the fifth reality. In there, Fran meets a younger version of herself who doesn't have a cat and is in the asylum. The dark theory in here is that Fran is heavily dosed with duotine and possibly lobotomized. We find a drawing of Edward and Polontras, an imaginary friend and an imaginary good doctor. It's possible Fran never had a home and had always been in the asylum. She grew up there and had the belief that she was at home. But back to this theory later. The fifth reality is the reimagination of Fran's house and the asylum. In there, she finds Mother Mabuka, the source of darkness and mother of Remor. After a long, ridiculous waiting list to see the doctor, Fran finally goes face to face with Remor, who is the head doctor, presumably representation of Oswald. Remor shows how Fran killed her own parents while having bloody eyes. Again, a sign of manipulation. In shock, Fran goes to a different room where she finds Dr. Deern strapped to an electric chair, awaiting his execution. Fran injects him with a syringe of red fluid, which could be duotine, which lets Dr. Deern see the ultra reality with Polontras and Edward. Soon Oswald and Aunt Grace arrive, telling Fran how she was designed to be a test subject before she was even born. Dr. Oswald was intrigued by the science behind twins and experimented on twins on a frequent basis. He experimented on Grace and Lucia, Fran's mother, who were twins, and instructed them to raise Fran and prepare her for his studies. But apparently, Fran's parents changed their minds after Fran is born and gift her a cat, which is a sign of their betrayal to Dr. Oswald, as they do something they're not supposed to, which leads us to the ending. Aunt Grace throws an incapable to speak Mr. Midnight into the never-ending space around the room, presumably killing him, and informs Fran how she was a test subject that Oswald cared about a lot, and how unique Fran is. Shocked to how cruel and two-faced Grace is, Fran jumps on her in a fit of rage to strangle her. Oswald rushes in and shoots Fran from the back, who ironically calls Fran a monster, while he instructs a loyal to the bone Grace to collect Fran's body so they can extract her brain and study it. Meanwhile, Dr. Deern pleads with them to rush Fran to the emergency as she can still survive the gunshot. Oswald persists that he only cares about his research when Edward suddenly appears, getting rid of Oswald and Grace. He calls Palontras, who comes in and pulls a purple bright shining beam from Fran's body, which revives her. Dr. Deern starts bleeding from his eyes, which then Palontras promises Fran, who will be safe at home, who won't remember any of this when he wakes up. When Fran persists on Dr. Deern's safety, Palontras appreciates her good heart and asks if she's sure before doing so, as Dr. Deern wasn't fully innocent, but showed remorse later on. Suddenly Mr. Midnight comes from behind Palontras, and Palontras takes Fran to Ithursta. Fran then mentions that she doesn't know everything, but what she knows is that between fear and weakness, or light and darkness, she chooses happiness, meaning that now she is ready for Ithursta, or in other words, heaven, after learning about her truth. Now, before going over a few theories that I have come up with, let's go over Dr. Leon's diary, a doctor who experiences all the realities and creatures Fran and other test subjects saw. Presumably a doctor who had a hand in synthesizing this hallucinogenic drug with Dr. Oswald. I found myself hunting the truth, but found the unexpected. I found what my senses couldn't show me. I found the truth that relays silently in the unknown. Leon Castillo, one of the 1,000. July 11th, 1908. My name is Leon. I'm currently 92 years old and living alone in a little house far away from the city. I have to admit, I never was fond of jewelry, houses or clothing. Since childhood, I always talked to animals, plants and insects, and even though I never got a response, I never quit. If you are reading this, maybe it's because you are looking for answers. Maybe you can see things that others can't, or you can feel what others avoid. You can listen to the silence and become one with everything. Leon with bleeding eyes. December 17th, 1875. I can't stop it. I can't control it. I see the black shadows everywhere. The blood, the messages, the screaming, all the pain. I can't figure out why this is happening to me. December 19th, 1875. I had a vision. I'm still breathing fear. I feel at war with my own mind. One of the shadows came down from the sky. I thought it was an angel. Its name is Rimor, the Prince of Darkness. From the fifth reality. It talked to me, played with me, and showed me all the terrors. It told me that I was the key to its existence. January 13th, 1876. I can see myself around. The other me, tell me lies, talks about all the pain and suffering in my life. The other me wants me to end my life. He smiles while pronouncing the words. And I have tried, hypnotized by his words, but there is always something saving me at the end. It must be love to live. January 15th, 1876. I met a shadow for the first time. They hunt weakness and pain. It said, we are born and feed from fear and the uncontrolled illness of the human mind. January 16th, 1876. After seeing Kamala react to water, I thought of trying a little experiment. The Kamala transformed into a new kind of creature when exposed to water. The metamorphosis was painful to watch. After the terrible screaming, the Kamala calmed down and started crying on the ground. It felt like the pain started disappearing. A bright and peaceful being was rising in front of me. The bright creature could read my thoughts. Thank you for waking me up. I was suffering. Now I must go where I belong, to a thirsta where all Valakas go after waking up. If you wish to see the light, you can come with me. You have the key. November 22nd, 1876. I dream of thousands of black cats surrounding my house, big yellow eyes staring at my sleep. Pandora, creature of the 5 realms of the essential existence, also known as FREE, free, resides in the human world. Third reality, Earth, Mars, and Jupiter. Consciousness, practice of will. Sinner seed, the end of vibration, when both ends, if opposites, are the same degree, resides in third and fourth reality. Death, Mabuka is the end of light. March 25th, 1877. Mother Mabuka is letting me go. I've spent 15 days here in Mabuka's den, and I'm tired. I don't need to hide from pain anymore, because it's part of me. It feels like love is everywhere, and in everything. I enjoy crying. I enjoy laughing. I enjoy living. Leon being tangled in bloody tentacles of Mabuka. I'm waiting for Lucy Ferns now. I'm ready to go home. I have to become their friends, or more precisely, I have to become them. They gather in filaments. That's why they look like they have growing hair. They have a face as means of communication and to scare off predators. Not much is known about Dr. Leon apart from his diary and a photo at the end, but according to his experiences, he confirms the existence of the 5 realities and what Fran goes through. He was a doctor working in the Oswald asylum, and according to his bleeding eyes, he possibly used the ingredient ectoplomatine to open the door between consciousness and subconsciousness, as mentioned before. His supernatural experiences started to occur in 1870s when he was in his 60s. Therefore, he possibly worked in the asylum extensively. We don't know much whether he performed experiments on people or not, but it's clear he had a hand in creating the duotine medicine. He possibly experimented with the drug himself and started seeing things more clearly. Things that others don't, with the proof of his eyes bleeding, which is a sign of possession on the remor or being affected by the drug. There are a few possibilities, with the 5 realities actually existing as the information is very detailed and match each other from different perspectives. But also, it might be a made-up world accessible through taking the duotine drugs. A place where human emotions are immensely enhanced. That is why Dr. Oswald tells Fran that remor is the manifestation of Fran's weakness and fears. Fran's weakness was to be alone and without her beloved parents, and her fear was that her parents would die, especially under her hands. Hence why, through many surreal messages and visions, she can't see that she's committing crimes against her parents and that she would be alone. Her negative thoughts were enhanced and echoed into visions, and finally, remor, the manifestation of those ideas and negativity, manipulated Fran to kill her parents. It's possible that each individual has a specific remor manifested for them, as Leon had one as well. Oswald mentions that for years he's been studying the complexity of twins and used Lucia and Grace as her test subjects to extend his studies. From Lucia comes Fran, a perfectly designed test subject for Oswald to experiment on. It's possible that Oswald synthesized the duotine pills and gave them to Fran from birth, and maybe even injecting it to a pregnant Lucia to prepare Fran. In fact, it's possible that the entirety of the 5 realities and its creatures come from the effects of duotine, enhancing the inner thoughts of people, which Oswald could benefit from by manipulating people and mind control them. Oswald even mentions that Remor did a good job at manipulating Fran to kill her parents. It's a possibility that Oswald wanted Fran's parents dead. He implanted the seed of insecurity in Fran's mind about fearing their death and abandonedness. And finally, the strong manifestation of fear and weakness, which is visualized to be a creature called Remor, forces Fran's hands into committing the murder. Now let's go over some theories about the story as a whole and if the events happened in Fran's head or in reality, and whether Fran is dead or alive. Fran lives happily with her parents. Her aunt comes over and spends time with her, pretending to be friendly, until Fran receives Mr. Midnight. Aunt Grace refers to Mr. Midnight as a traitor and someone who should be blamed for the death of Fran's parents. Therefore, it's a possibility that after Fran receives the cat, Grace consults this with Dr. Oswald, which raises concerns to Lucia's full cooperation with them in order to experiment on Fran. Fran's parents go on a mysterious trip while Grace spends time with Fran. It's a possibility Fran's parents went to see Dr. Oswald and discuss with him that they want to pull out of the experiment. This presumably angers Dr. Oswald, who manipulates Fran through enhancing her emotions, especially fear, which gives rise to a visual representation of Fran's doubts, which leads to her to kill her parents. Therefore, Mr. Midnight is thought to be the culprit and the Kickstarter to Grace doubting Lucia's full loyalty. Maybe that's why she doesn't like the cat, as it leads to her sister's death. There's yet another theory of mine, which suggests that Fran is actually born and raised in the asylum, and her being in a happy house with her parents is only the effects of duotine. In the fifth reality, Fran sees an alternate version of herself when she's tied to the bed by Aunt Grace, who tells Fran that she's tied up as her hands do bad things. This fortifies the theory that Fran is unstable mentally and easy to manipulate, and that also the alternate Fran we see in the asylum, who doesn't know anything about Mr. Midnight, is an actual memory of Fran, which suggests she was born and raised in the asylum. There's a straitjacket in Fran's closet too, which shows how unstable she was. When Fran runs into the forest and faints, it's also suggested by the newspaper that she freezes to death, which raises Dr. Deern's curiosity to check on Fran's grave. This again might suggest that Fran actually died in the forest, but her body was taken to the asylum, so experiments could be carried on her. Now moving on to the asylum, considering if Fran is still alive at this point, she sees Kamala's and the Ultra reality through taking duotine pills. Dr. Deern tries to actually prevent Fran from taking them, but Oswald changes the bottles and tries to give them to her yet again, fooling Dr. Deern. Hence why Dr. Deern has a conversation with Grace, saying that she needs help, who actually cares about the well-being of Fran, but Grace wants to take Fran away from Dr. Deern so they can conduct their experiments. After taking the duotine pills, Fran's dreams tell her to take more of them, to see the reality. In the 5 realities, the state of duality and two-sidedness is heavily emphasized, a complex topic that Dr. Oswald has been perplexed and intrigued by, as he mentions that he had spent his entire life researching about twins. Therefore, this might suggest that the entire 5 realities and the world and its creatures in Ultra reality are just the creation of Dr. Oswald through his synthesized medicine. He specifically designed these pills to enhance the thought process of duality, darkness and light, and study it further through closely monitoring the effects on his test subjects, with Fran being the ideal test subject. Fran experiences visual hallucinations of negative thought process of her parents and herself, which might again suggest how Remor was manifested. Remor even plays with Fran's psyche, saying if she leaves the asylum she will face insanity, and Remor indeed tries to drive Fran insane, which at times she doubts herself. When Fran escapes the asylum, things take an even more supernatural turn. As Fran tries to leave, she gets possessed by Remor, and the guard on her tail gets his head removed. But suddenly Remor loses grasp of Fran, and Fran runs into a mystical hedge maze following a mechanical cat, presumably created by Edward. It's possible that in fact, Fran never managed escaping the asylum and got caught by the guard, or all of it even happened in her head. Remor, on the other hand, even though a figment of Fran's imagination, is very real to her. But at the same time, a strong imaginary friend called Edward, the link between darkness and light, someone who helps her cope with sadness and fear, comes to Fran's aid and helps her. All of this in theory is happening to Fran after her brain is being studied and experimented on. When Fran goes to the bottom of the well, this could simply be her imagination going wild after her subconscious learning about the twins who were experimented on and thrown down the well, which makes her visually see them and imagine what they had to go through. When Fran goes to Ithersta and has her vegetative state, she possibly goes into coma, hence making her become paralyzed. She didn't have legs or arms anymore and feels to be a log, but a doctor manages to get her out of coma, hence she gets legs and arms. Pelantros is possibly an imagination from Fran as well, how she presumed a good doctor, to be fluffy and nice to talk to. Then when the wizard tells Fran to stay, the Tree King says that Fran is not ready yet and that she needs to face her truth. Therefore, she leaves Ithersta. Ithersta is possibly the representation of heaven or a good place. Fran's soul, however, is not ready to stay yet, and she wants to find the truth of who killed her parents and to get back to her Aunt Grace. This is presumably all happening while the unconscious next to death body of Fran is lying in the asylum, while she's being experimented on. Edward, a link between light and darkness, takes Fran to the living world, so Fran can face her truth. When the ship crashes due to Kamala's or the bad thoughts and fear Fran still has, Edward wants to end the story, so Fran can move on to Ithersta rather than suffering anymore. But Fran is adamant that she wants a happy ending, showing that she's not ready to go back to Ithersta yet. When Fran goes to her house, she can't enter, as she doesn't have a physical body anymore. In there, Dr. Deern interacts with Fran, who takes her to her grave to see whether she's actually dead or not. This can be interpreted in different ways, but I believe Dr. Deern, who's a good doctor and not fond of the ill practices of the asylum, leaves his job and tries to find the truth. He is confused as he saw Fran in the asylum, and then suddenly she disappears, with a false story saying that she died before even getting to the asylum. Therefore, he tries to investigate. He presumably communicates with Fran's soul, or at this point, Fran imagines talking to Dr. Deern. Fran even mentions seeing herself dead in the asylum. Soon later, Fran is yet again possessed by the powerful visualization of her fear and weakness, Remor. She's taken to a surreal fifth world, which is a mixture of the asylum and her house. In there, Fran finally finds her truth. It's possible that her soul or subconscious roams the room she's being experimented on, which seems to be a morgue. She hears Grace and Oswald talking and unveiling the secrets of what is going on, and how Oswald created the supernatural world with synthesizing the duotine so he can mind control people, which is inspired by duality, while she sees Dr. Deern strapped to be killed by an electric chair as he knows too much and disagrees with the practices, who pleads with them to rush Fran to emergency and save her. That is why Fran perceives Dr. Deern as a good man, as he goes to Fran's grave and expresses remorse and fighting against the asylum. She realizes that he was only taking orders blindly. Finally, after learning about the harsh reality that Aunt Grace is a horrible person, Fran breaks her only link to the third reality, or the world we live in, which is her link to her Aunt Grace, and then finally gets freed by Palantros, with her subconscious or soul, the bright shining purple light, getting detached from the world, so she can reside in her new world, Ethursta, without being bothered by negative visions and Kamalas again. Palantros finally frees Fran's soul from being experimented on any further, when he slowly takes all of her remaining senses away. She then finally says that she chooses happiness, hence absolved from guilt and fear. Therefore, the theories are that Fran has always been in the asylum and never left, with a happy house only being in her imagination. The next theory is that she doesn't successfully escape the asylum and gets experimented on, lobotomized, and given large doses of ectoplomatine to be studied. Hence, she journeys through the 5 realities and sees supernatural. And the final theory is that in fact the 5 realities exist, as it's a phenomenon experienced by everyone who had taken duotine, as characterized by bleeding eyes, even finally Dr. Deern seeing the ultra reality when he's injected with a dose of duotine. What are your thoughts about the story of Fran Bow? Was it all in her head, or was it real? Was her imagination so strong that she could actually live in it to the extent that it became a reality, even that she could see emotions and human feelings enhanced to the point that they are visualized? Let me know by leaving a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, stay tuned by hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell for more horror-related content. You can also check out the latest merch by hitting the card above or the link in the description. It's been your host Star. Till the next video, have a fantastic day.